So what's wrong with this picture? Why is this how not to think about the geopolitics of risk? You don't have to read the whole text. It should jump out at you from the first couple of lines. What's the first line? This week in geopolitics. Let's think about how moronically stupid that is just by the title. Because you don't have to be Harold Mackinder to think that geopolitics implies some kind of structural or rather long-term process in the world, rather than this week. And I think it points to a particular type of heuristic error that Danny Kahneman has written a lot about, which is an availability bias. That Trump has been elected, there are geopolitical implications, something happened this week, therefore there are geopolitical implications. I'm not entirely sure that follows. The second one is the line there, I'm not sure if you can see it, stalking the black swan with George Friedman. You must have heard of Taleb's idea of the black swan, right? So it's a high impact, low probability event that by definition cannot be known before time because there's no information in the prior data set that would tell you it's coming. All swans are white, all swans are white, all swans are white. I go to Australia, black swan. Pfft, that's it. What can you do? It's not in the prior data set. How do you hunt a black swan? You don't. It's another incredibly stupid way of looking at things. If it's a black swan, by definition, it can't be captured ahead of time. It can only happen to you. So here we have a newsletter for investors on Wall Street that they actually pay money for, that in its opening 2 lines is going to talk about Trump and risk and is based upon astonishingly faulty premises right from the start. Hysteria, sloppy thinking. Now, would standard approaches to risk help us understand his risk propensity, since America has very much taken a roll of the dice? And when we get to the Q&A, if you want to talk about all the reasons why Trump got elected, happy to go through all that stuff, but let's just focus on this just now. Well, that, of course, depends on what you mean by risk. So let's do a little bit of risk primer in terms of thinking about how this works. The little slide on the left, I think, is very great. After interviewing thousands of people, I found a strong correlation exists between being smart and agreeing with me. Right? So there's a very correlative story there. And then on the other one, you've got the Mandelbrottian versus Gaussian distributions. Again, that's sort of Taleb stuff, and other people have pointed this out. So what's the point of these 2 slides? First one is the notion that risk is quantifiable. You already mentioned uncertainty in this. Trump, if quantifiable risk is based upon something, it's based upon a past set of data. There is no data. Right? So basically, you cannot quantify this. You're in the world of deep uncertainty right from the start. So anything that you're doing is you're projecting into that inferences, which are ex ante to any data which don't exist. So you can't tell a correlative story. You can't tell a causal story. You simply don't know. So examples of this. They hired his national security advisor, Michael Flynn, is a known Islamophobe, who has at times said that war with Iran is probably a good idea. This is very scary stuff. You know who else has said that? Tony Blair, repeatedly for the past decade. Funny how we don't recognize that one, but we recognize this one. Availability bias happening right at that moment. This one over here, even if you did have the data, the chances are that what you're looking at is a fat-tailed distribution. And I'm going to go into this in detail because I think it applies to major political events. And if this qualifies to a major political event, it essentially means that a normal distribution of probabilities, even if you had the data to calibrate it, simply doesn't apply in this case. So you have to change the way that you think about likely events under a Trump presidency, or indeed over any other extreme presidency. I'll give you another example from American politics. In the 2000 election, at a time of euphoria rather than hysteria, when the stock market had hit an all-time high, relatively speaking, and there was the dot-com bubble, and it was Bush versus Gore. It was enlightened pragmatism versus compassionate conservatism. That's what it was called, right? God knows what those things actually meant. Then what happens? Along comes a classic black swan event. You can't hunt for this, 9/11. Which opens the door to a bunch of people who take over the foreign policy apparatus, the neocons, which ends up taking us into a war in Iraq, which has been brewing and ongoing and has blown up every country from Tunisia to Afghanistan and back and continues to this day and has caused in part a migrant crisis in Europe. Now, if you had known all of the data you could have possibly wanted to know about Bush or Gore, could you have got to that conclusion? No.